Good afternoon. Welcome to this week's Revenue Hacks, and a very special episode it is too. This week we have the man with the world of data and the best dad jokes, which have kept us all smiling for the last 6 months. So we've got a lot to get through, and we really want to put Robin in the hot seat. So we're going to kick off with intros straight away. Khristina?
Hi everyone, Khristina. You all know me by now, so zip.
B?
Hey, I'm V. I'm the founder of MyOC. It's a revenue consulting company helping hotels optimizing revenue and processes.
And last but not least, Robin. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I mean, thank you so much for having me. And I guess by introduction, I am born a South African, living a Brit at the moment, but most importantly, just love the hotel industry and have always been involved ever since I started working back when I was about 21. So, yeah, that's me. Oh, and I work at STR and have lots of
Excellent. That's why you're here. I'm Susanne. I'm the Revenue and Performance Director at Journey Travel here in Cheltenham. I look after revenue and our performance programs, social, digital, and client success. So we're going to have a bit of a warm-up so that Robin can give some insights straight away. We're looking at this week, and the news changes daily, but with that in mind, what can hotels focus on now? What are we doing in our properties? And Robin, what's your advice? Who wants to start?
Talking from a property point of view, I think because the UK is going into a very similar lockdown in Ireland, I just think properties need to be prepared to introduce localized packages, localized date night packages, localized kind of tours to get people who actually live in your area or your city to come in and stay in your property. In Dublin at the moment, everywhere is rolling out Dublin date nights. Take Back Your City is another one. And a lot of places, like there's a new international hotel that opened that are actually doing a full date night package where you can come, stay, BB dinner, and then you can actually get your friend's room for free if you bring a friend along. So, it's I know it's a very strange one. We would always have been allergic to them words free, complimentary. However, they're the things now that we need to rely on to drive businesses, getting the message out there that we are safe, we're contained, that we actually take care of all the necessary precautions to keep you protected so that you can enjoy your time with us. And it's communication.
But why would you bring your friend along on a date night? That's my question.
It's like
a fun
in
date.
Ireland, if you have at the moment, you see in Ireland, you can't actually dine in, which is interesting unless you're a resident in a property. So technically, you can't actually sit down and have dinner with friends, something that we would have done on a regular basis.
True.
So as a resident, you can do that. So that's why they're offering to do that. So you've got essentially 4 people, additional F&B spend. Think of it that way. It's an additional bottle of wine, an additional dessert, and it's kind of looking at all the different elements that you can add on as you go by.
COVID loopholes. There you go.
There we go.
So like in the UK, you can't go and meet 6 people unless you take a football with you and pretend that you're playing outdoor sports. Then you're fine. So, yeah. I think going back to your question, Suzanne, I was chatting about this with a few people at STR yesterday, and trying to absorb the news of certainly the announcements in the UK, and the recent increase in lockdowns in Dublin and all of that. And it kind of feels like hopefully never have you had the real fear of drowning or been in that moment where you might drown, but maybe you've been in the ocean and you get hit by a big wave and you get knocked over and you suck in a bit of water and it's not great, and then you stand up. And just as you're collecting yourself, another massive wave is heading towards you, and that's kind of what it feels like at the moment. It feels like we got hit by the first wave in March, April, May, and summer was way better than many of us expected. I think, especially if we were in markets like the UK and Ireland where there was good domestic demand. And just as we've managed to get through that and start feeling really positive about recovery and getting through this, it suddenly looks like there is that big second wave that's going to be hitting us, even if the restrictions are good enough to stop the virus coming back in the way it did. It seems that the consequences, the the fallout from those restrictions are still going to be quite severe for our industry. And so that's kind of that's a feeling. And when they say the most important thing when you're at that threat of drowning is to not panic. And so that would be the one main thing I'd say is, even though that feeling is out there at the moment and it's worse in some places than it is in others, it's important not to panic and to really look at what the options are and the scenarios are and plan for them.
I think we're definitely going to come on to just those what-if scenarios further in on the chat. B, is there anything that from a day-to-day perspective that you're reacting to or planning for that, you can maybe share that might help some other people?
Yeah, well, I think as Robin was just saying, like the second wave, we all were fearing about it. We were all saying like, yeah, we need to be prepared. We need to know what to do, blah, 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 if it happens again. But deep down, none of us thought it would happen like that. And it will happen. So I think we just need to, stop believing that, it's going to be back to normal and that we can all plan our budget next year as if like Q2, Q3, it's going to be kind of like a normality back. Like we just need to make sure that, we had a strategy for the short term for the domestic market. We were kind of shifting our marketing also around that, and we need to go even deeper there. We need to make sure that we continue in that direction because the other side is too blurry and we have no control on it. Whereas we have control on what's happening near us, and that's really where we need to tap into a new market for most of the properties.
I guess I haven't quite realised that the lack of control is a thing. I'm still behaving like I'm in full control and putting things in place accordingly. Like, no, this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. But for us, for all of our properties, we're looking really closely at the stay controls across different rates, different room types, and then tying that back to data so that if there is that domestic tourism boom and that continues through the peaks of next year, that all of our hotels are really well placed to capitalise on every single day. So we're making some assumptions about how the peaks and troughs are going to go. We actually don't know, but we're making assumptions and then making sure that the price points, the distress level are in place, that there's length of stays on them, and we cross that over all the room types and all the rates to just maximise everywhere we can. So that's the bit of advice we're kind of giving out at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay. So we don't know. That's the short answer, isn't it? We don't know.
No, we need to be careful with pricing also. We've seen that. I mean, the price war has been a massive topic since the beginning. Some companies went directly through it. I'm not going to name them, but we were like, okay, that's fine. But as long as the other ones are sustaining, then it's fine. We're kind of good in our market. But like early September, we've seen, for example, in London, some like crazy 5-star hotels like dropping the rate to levels that you could never imagine. It's great. I love to stay in a hotel like that for £200, but in reality, this is just like really bad for the whole the rest of the industry. I'm not even sure it's really driving that much demand. Well, maybe me actually. I'm going to go there actually, but this is not a long-term strategy. I think we need to think about it a little bit differently. And the ones that are hit by these kind of behaviors, then we cannot just sit and cry. We just have to say, okay, what can I do to just counter that? Like, what else can I bring? Because definitely you have some different options in the packages that you do, in the offerings, etc.
Yeah, totally agree. Sorry.
Do we think the staycation bubble is going to burst, though? Do we? If you look at it this way, because major cities become locked down, will people now kind of say, well, it's coming up to Christmas, all the cities are kind of locked, we're going into like a restriction type thing for 6 months, I'm not going to travel anywhere for the next 6 months? Ireland is smaller than the UK, we all know that, but if one county locks down, that has a knock-on effect. We've seen it this week with Dublin, how across the country, and I'm sure Robin can say the same, if you looked at Forward Star, that 50% cancellations happened across the country just because Dublin went into lockdown mode last Friday. Automatically, Friday night, there was a 43% increase in actual cancellations across the southern part of Ireland. Which has a huge devastating effect onto properties that would rely on people to come and stay with them.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that there's no doubt that people's confidence in travel has taken a massive dip in the last couple of weeks. And, you know, with discretionary leisure travel, confidence is incredibly important. So there's no other way to look at it other than that's got to be negative towards the demand that would have otherwise come through. And, you know, we were heading out of the peak leisure demand season anyway. So this is likely to make that a bit harder in terms of the drops. So yeah, not good news, but also you can't really ignore it, or ignoring it is not going to help it make it any different.
So just going to pull up a question from Julie, who's a regular. Julie watches every week, and she's asking, are STR still forecasting 2023 before international travel recovers, or has that been pushed out? What do you think?
It depends what you mean by the word recovers. If you mean improves, we're forecasting a lot sooner than 2023. Our base case and the latest forecast we released a month ago was that international travel would start to recover from Q2, Q3 next year, but improve, not recover to where it was. If you're talking about recovering to where it was, or demand in total getting back to where it was in 2019, then yes, 2023 is what we're expecting. And you know, well, we haven't revised our forecast in the last week or two, and I'd actually say I don't think any of the short-term negative news necessarily changes the longer-term outlook. I think and to be honest, the longer that this goes on, assuming it gets better, there will undoubtedly be pent-up demand that will come back, and come back quite strongly in the beginning. The question is how long it will then take airlines to recover capacity and all of that. I mean, if that's where, if you want to look at how long it's going to take, look at the headlines around airlines, and you know, them talking about they're cutting. I mean, Lufthansa was saying they were cutting about 30%. They were getting rid of 30% of their planes, not parking them, like getting rid of them. That doesn't come back straight away, right? That to build that kind of capacity back, you need to have the 70% that you have left full, and then enough confidence that it's worthwhile investing to get new planes. So there is definitely going to be it'll take a little while for that to come back.
So just if we're thinking along, you know, the point about travel 2023, what's happening with the forecast for going into next year and the year after, when you're looking at the data, do you have various different models, like a what if scenario? So if a vaccine becomes available, how does that affect the forecast? Are you looking at various different pros and cons, I guess, of how those models start to look?
So the numbers that, you know, ideally we would have multiple different scenarios, but there's complexities when you do that, because you create a lot of confusion too. So the numbers we put out one set of numbers, and there is a base set of assumptions that we use for that scenario. And in this case, it was broadly that there would be some kind of cure before the end of the year, that would enable vaccines and some kind of measured control of disease to be in place, so that by the end of Q1, travel could start to recover in Q2. And it wouldn't be a straight up again, because I think the reality is there aren't going to be 6 billion vaccines or 12 billion, depending on how many we need, available straight away. And also, you know, there's also no guarantee that everybody's going to take it. But ultimately, that there would be enough additional safety measures through the use of a vaccine to really allow business travel and international travel to start again from Q2 next year. And so we had, I mean, it depends on which market you look at, but generally, if demand was sitting at 50-60% below what it would usually be now, at the end of this year in our current forecast, by the end of next year, it would be sitting at 15 to 20% below what it would usually be.
So I don't know if I can ask this, but I'm going to anyway. How do you collate that data? What data points are you looking at? What drives the ultimate decision for that final forecast that you then put out? Where do you get all that information from, and who do you consult? We want to know the ins and outs.
Yeah. So we work with tourism economics as part of Oxford Economics Group, and so if you think of this as a marriage, STR brings all of the hotel performance data, supply data, new pipelines, events data, and really sort of analyzing what's going on in the markets. And then tourism economics brings all of the macroeconomic data, all of the international arrivals, the travel data, the tourism data, and they build an econometric model that takes all of that, the data, the events, current trending, supply, all of that, and we use that together and put it in the model, and then we work through it and see if it makes sense, discuss the base case assumptions around things like when will we have some kind of cure, and then ultimately look at what the model produces for each city, and then we look at it, and in some cases we do adjust it based on discussions with various operators and what we're seeing in the market with forward data, but we try not to too much because it's a slippery slope. So
sorry.
No, B, on you go.
How do you think hotels should use this data then for next year? Because what we've seen, what we've heard from hoteliers is that the STR data has been great as like macro level. However, when they were looking at their set, it was not so clear on what was used, and we were seeing like levels of like 30% occupancy. Like, this is definitely not true, and I think it wasn't clear. So how can hotels use this data? And how can they explain also to stakeholders, like, this is wrong, don't look at it, this is like, because it's maybe aggregated across like a different market, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And the reality of the industry we work in is that we can talk about country numbers, and we know that that's meaningless in the context of comparing a Southampton to a London. Looking at the whole of the UK or England is aggregates those things, and it does it to a level where when you're thinking about an individual hotel, it clearly it's going to be quite different, and it goes even further than that, because when you talk about London, well, it's quite different if you're talking about in Mayfair, or if you're talking about Canary Wharf, or if you're talking about outer skirts, and if you're talking about a luxury hotel versus a budget hotel. So what we tried to do with the webinars and the data that we've shared is just to give that global perspective of what's going on at a macro level, then through our tools and hopefully with the data, you can see how that differs in your micro markets with your specific comp set or sub market. So I guess to answer the question, you've got to look at as many data sets as you can to try and best show and tell the story. And I wish I could do a webinar for each and every hotel and explain exactly what's going on, but we can't do that. So I think it's about looking at all those different data sources, and if you don't have the right competitor set, or if you want to add something else, and we can look at that and see how we can help with that. But it's trying to piece together based on the different segments of data how you're performing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
I mean, I think honestly, I can tell you, and it's for some people it'll look like it doesn't make sense at all when you look at your comp set, and you're maybe your comp set's way below you or way above you, but in many cases I can tell you it is true. We've never had more. If you look at the range of performance in a given competitor set or market from what it used to, there was always a range, right? There would be the average occupancy would be 80%, and there'd be some that would be at 95 and some that would be at 65. But now we're talking like the average is 40%, and there are some hotels that are up at 90% occupancy, and there are others that are down at 15%. And it really does come down to the way the hotel's being sold, the location, the strategy, the pricing, and so there's never been a more important time, and now I'm doing a bit of like selling STR. There's never been more important time to benchmark, because you can't just compare to last year. You really, if you have to understand what other hotels around you are doing, and the range is massive.
Yeah. So I've got two questions based on that. Sorry, before B jumps in, because I've kept these really, really quiet. So when you're mentioning, so just for instance, central London at the moment, there's a lot of hotels that are privately closed. However, they are submitting STR data where they've got the asylum seekers and homelessness in there. That is clearly having a huge impact on occupancies around the area. Or are you asking the hotels not to put that business into STR? And secondly, we did have a question from Ronald, which ties in with our next question on your forecast variances from when the start of the pandemic, mid-March, to now. Have you found that, has your forecast ever been incorrect, basically, and or have they been completely wrong? But like, again, it's just like humans. We all can mess up.
Can I just throw something? See, just before we answer that, just one question, and it is a bit of an STR plug. Would it be helpful if all hotels submitted their information to STR? Because how skewed is the picture with STR hotels and then all the provincial properties that are not submitting data, which leads to Roland's question and Khristina's. You need more hotels to submit more data, surely?
Yeah, I mean, our goal is to have all hotels providing data and to have the absolute perfect market data. I mean, in the UK and Ireland, our sample is pretty strong, particularly when you look at it as a proportion of number of rooms. We're well over 2/3, so it's pretty strong. We're not quite there yet on the forward data, but we're getting there very fast. So that being said, it's always, clearly always we want to add more properties. So if there's any properties that you guys are working with that either directly or that that aren't working with us, and you can encourage them to join, please do, because really, I mean, there are options that don't cost anything. So yes, we want more hotels so we can get better data. Is that the question?
Yeah. Part of the question. Yeah.
So when you're looking at, central London, Dublin, big cities where there's homelessness and there's asylum seekers being bought in as RFPs through contracts, hotels are submitting this data. And I've noticed that in some of my comp sets, it's actually the data is skewed. Although, there's nights where I'm doing 30%. And actually for the last 2 weeks in London, it's been a little bit better for us. We're at 16-70%. There's still hotels that are doing 90% in occupancy that are in my hotel area because they've got them. Are you guys tracking them as transient groups, in the segmented mix, or have you started to ask the hotels not to put that data in? Do you find it skews the overall picture of how the industry is doing because these are private lets, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, we looked at this a lot, and depending on where you go around the world, there's some hotels that have been used for hospitals. There's some hotels that have been used for quarantine purposes. So it's not a hospital, but it's being used to quarantine travelers. I think there were two questions there. Do we include it or don't we? And we ultimately followed USALI guidance around it, which if this is a situation where the hotel is voluntarily doing this, it is essentially a big book contract, a big group contract. It's still being run by hotel staff. They're still operating it. Then we think it is right that you do include that. And yes, it does skew things, but that's a commercial decision that hotel's made to have a high occupancy but at a very low rate. So yes, we do include those. But if it's a hotel where it's effectively being commandeered, it's not really being run by the hotel anymore, by the management, then we look to exclude it, and we try and make sure that those hotels exclude. So, that's not to say that we get all of those 100. So if there's 100% right. So if there are any where you have a question, then let us know and we can follow up on it. In terms of the segmentation, that should come through in group or contract. So you'd see it in the segmentation data. But to be honest, I've not 100% validated that myself. But that's where it should come through. If it's not, that's where it should come through, because it is a big group contract.
And have your forecasts ever been wrong?
Always.
What is
every single one?
Don't say that.
Well, no, of course they've all been wrong. I mean, it's like, especially in the current scenario. I mean, I remember the first forecast we put out was it in mid-March? I can't remember. Might have been. I'm going to say better than that. It was probably February, and we were forecasting the impact of COVID, and our assumed base case was that it wouldn't be as bad as SARS. So we got that wrong. But it's because nobody forecast how bad it was going to be from an impact on society. So, yeah, we do get it wrong. But the thing is, we look at it every quarter, and we revise it and update it as best we can. So, I mean, I'll give you an example. our latest forecasts looked at where demand had come to at the end of summer, and yes, it dipped down for the leisure destinations, but for places like London and other cities, we did have it gradually improving towards the end of the year. Yeah, based on the last 2 weeks, I think the reality is that whatever we have now in terms of performance in these key cities is kind of, I would, if I was talking scenarios, I would say that that's the new normal at best until there's a cure. So the levels of demand that we're seeing coming through now in September, and I can touch on some of the data later on, is I think it's the new normal. So and our base case forecasts are probably a bit better than that at the moment. So as we revise them in November, I think we might be bringing those down a bit. But it's changing so rapidly, and so much depends on when we introduce these lockdown nodes. Does it control the virus, or is something more required?
So when a city's performed, let's take Edinburgh. What I'm hearing from my contacts in Edinburgh is that actually they've performed a lot better than they expected. So if you think about that, if you're a revenue manager and you're forecasting for the next 3 to 6 months, and your forecast is out by 3 to 5%, you're staying on that call with your managing director on a Friday. So looking at Edinburgh, and what's actually happened, are you seeing a greater variance than 3 to 5%, and are you staying on the call at the end of revenue hacks?
So Edinburgh during the course of August went all the way up to 64% occupancy, and in the last 2 weeks it's dropped down to 50%. So that's still pretty good. Yeah, that's market leading occupancy around the world pretty much. I think what's the question? I mean, as I said, I think looking at a market like that, that's probably the best base case going forward for a while.
Okay, so I guess when we looked in March and we kind of thought, the picture was quite bleak, Edinburgh really was, along with all the other cities, apart from Aberdeen, which was very buoyant. But if that's sitting around about 50% now, so it hit 64%, nobody could have expected that. We're sitting around about 50 now. Can we expect that to be the new normal going forward for the next 12 months? I guess that's where I'm coming from. And the variance to what we said back in March. So is 50% optimistic going forward?
So if you think about what, sorry, somebody else say something.
I think to be fair, knowing what we have now, the information that we have at the moment is definitely, as what Robin has said, is going to leave the paveway towards the future. I think writing budgets, to Sylvia's question, can she write it in pencil? I'm writing mine in pencil. I've got a gigantic rubber with me, eraser ready to go. But I've already had conversations with properties and different groups, and they're looking at a 5% increase post-pandemic, month on month. That's not going to happen. If you do 50% this week, that might not be the case next week. However, there's a greater chance that you're going to finish out at 50% at the end of the month. For instance, our hotel at Central London, August was a bit wishy-washy for us. However, the last 3 weeks has been phenomenal. We've been doing 60-odd% every week. And, that's unusual to do. And again, it's all static. It's low pricing. So don't get me wrong. We're not the lowest in the market. However, in that particular region in London, we are outdoing the comp set, which is great to see because it's only a small property. Do I predict that that's going to continue? I'm trying to. You can never 100% say it is going to happen. However, you have to strive to try and hit that. And I'm quite happy if I get between the 45 and 62% in occupancy every day, to be honest with you. It just kind of it keeps the owners happy. It keeps me happy. It keeps money in the door and it keeps staff going. And at the moment, we are not going for profit. We are just going to pay the bills, pay staff. And then after that, that's it. We just need to make the money to pay our staff, pay our bills at the moment. And I think that's what properties need to do for the future. Just, the next 3 to 6 months is going to be very difficult. I wouldn't be forecasting any increases going forward unless there's a massive drastic change in a vaccine overnight. Then that's the only time we're going to be able to do it. And I think winter will be bleak, but you need to, as Susanne, myself, have always said in the past, put in the proper marketing and communications in the background for that. To hear that Edinburgh has been a market leader across the world in occupancy and across Europe especially is fantastic. So well done to Edinburgh. That's fantastic to do. especially because it is a city and we haven't seen that trend in other cities. And I think the only way forward is that we try to push collectively together. As we said, don't go into a rate war. We've said this before. Will people listen? No, but it's up to you as a property to try and drive additional way of revenue to keep yourself going.
Yeah, I think we're not to stop just thinking about the forecast. Like people are obsessed with that, and
it's impossible.
No, it's impossible. We should rather spend time on like working at what can we do to have business, to drive more business, etc. Rather than trying to guess what this number will be. Let's STR do it for us. That's fine, and we just use this kind of data. But I mean, when I hear all those companies asking their RMs to redo their forecast like 2 times a week, you're like, seriously, there's no point. And you use like a valuable person that could help you to drive some more business somewhere else. So it's really important we shift away from that. Yeah, we need it. We need more stakeholders, but
absolutely, totally agree.
Yeah. I think that the thing I'd add to that is there's sort of there's 2 sides to forecasting. One is what do you think the revenue is going to be, and the other one is what support are you going to get from the government in terms of enabling people to be employed, whether that be the sort of the UK furlough type system, or I know what I think what Ireland is doing is fantastic, which is funding the labour cost to the percentage that revenues come down, because that just makes it so much better. It's far better to have somebody working, even if the government's paying for them to work, than it is having them sit at home and having the government pay them to sit at home. I don't really understand why the UK went down the approach it did, because people start to lose confidence. It's far better to have people engaged in their job. And so anyway, so getting to the budget points, I think for me, the way I'd look at it is, I can't see things getting much better for the rest of this year into Q1. Hopefully they do, but you probably have to assume that they won't in your base case, in your base case scenario. But if it does get better, be able to respond to that. And then importantly, where I really think it will get better, regardless of how bad things are with the virus, really is if we think that this year was a strong staycation year, next year is going to be a bumper staycation year. Because I think when we start getting into that January period where people most are usually looking to book a holiday elsewhere, there's still going to be so much uncertainty, and so many people missed out on getting a location that they wanted this summer, that they want to book early and get something early. So I think you'll see a lot come on the books for leisure destinations, for leisure demand quite early on in 2021. So I'd watch out for that, and then that'll help you plan for as that gets closer and closer.
Absolutely agree. We're already seeing that. I mean, most of our properties are leisure, like 4 to 5 star, UK hotels and across the world, and I guess that's why the advice at the start is to say, get your house in order, get your stay restrictions in place, make sure you've got everything planned out for the best case scenario, and work backwards on how you have to pull that demand through the door. Get your marketing action sorted, get your data sorted, get your calls to action in place, and control that business every single day. We're seeing very strong demand. It's continuing all the way into December. We're seeing some business shifting into next year. It's positive. So I guess that's, also, I think that's quite an important thing to note. There is some positivity out there. Just use it wisely.
So for STR, how are you going to do to help us quantify those new demand or this new way of reporting? Like we cannot get a data that is only occupancy, average rate, and RevPAR basically. So Davina had a question. She said, wouldn't data also be skewed if the rooms are being sold as office spaces per hour? This is a new fad. Which segment should be ideally tagged in? Like how are we going to report that? Or hotels are becoming a little bit more of a hybrid, like, yeah, this is a office space, this is a meeting room, this is like a bedroom, this is more of a long stay. So is there any thoughts from STR on how can we report on that?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen the examples of hotels being used as for alternative purposes, and I'd be lying if I said I had a simple answer for you on this call in terms of how to record that. I think ultimately it needs to go into the revenue stream, and we do track total revenue. Whether or not that room is completely out of service or not and should be included in occupancy is, I think, a good question. I don't know how prevalent it is yet versus just anecdotal examples. So that's a good question to follow up on.
I think it kind of falls under day use, because day use rooms actually go into the STR, if you look at it that way.
Okay.
Them numbers go into STR. So a hotel can essentially be 110% occupied or 101% occupied. Obviously, they bring it back to the 100 because it's wrong. But, that revenue does go in, that room is counted. So if you're even sitting at 99% that night, that extra one can always go through. Do I agree with that? To be honest with you, I don't, because I think that skews your business. I know it's a bedroom being used, but however, if you've got a 200 bedroom property at the moment in the middle of a city centre that's only doing 10, 20, 30% in occupancy, how true will your occupancy be if you're renting out 10 rooms as office space next year when you're looking at your information? It does look great. However, I think you should be painting a truer picture and actually posting it as room hire. In a way, it goes to total revenue in the end. It just doesn't go to your accommodation. It still goes to your bottom line. And I think that kind of allows you to have a better picture when you're building your budget this time next year for the following year.
Yeah. I'm going to just pick up this question from Julie. Thanks, Julie, for the question. It's a good one. I'm so fascinated to hear what you girls have got to say about this, and you, Robin, if you've got any insights in profit. So recent hot stats information on break-even noted that running room only in luxury increases the break-even point. So with full service being down 31%, which is the lowest of all segments, do the team agree that this is accurate, and are we forecasting for that? So sell more room only, make more profit. That's, in a nutshell. What's your thoughts?
I think that's, the maths on that works. But the question is, if you're only selling a room, will somebody actually stay? Will the occupancies of a hotel that gives full service be higher than one that's room only? So that's a question. I know there are travelers out there that would prefer to have an option where there is the ability to get food. So do you limit your ability to drive occupancy by cutting back those services? Remember, that's why they're included in the first place. But ultimately, each hotel needs to look at the degree to which it's being able to break even or not on that department. And if it's costing them, whatever, 10 grand a month, 20 grand, let's get more than that, 20, 30 grand a month to run it, and they're only getting 5,000 revenue, then it probably doesn't make sense. So it's a dynamic one. It depends also, in Ireland, because you get the funding of the labor costs, it's almost free to have people working there, and therefore it makes sense to run F&B. The margins are completely different.
Well, in Ireland, funny enough, Robin mentioned that we had to do the €9 spend as well. So you had to buy a meal to the value of €9 to obtain alcohol. So food and beverage across Ireland, and in particular because you couldn't dine out, essentially bed and breakfast just went through the roof. Hotels had seen a huge increase year on year in B&B. I think it's an interesting one because for years as hoteliers, we would have always sold room only. B&B was always, a way of getting additional revenue to the kitchen and also some small bit in room revenue. However, some brands don't allow it to happen. So even if it's a luxury hotel, you've got your brands like IHG who have Intercontinental, or you have your express brands like Holiday Inn Express, or you've got Hampton by Hilton where breakfast is inclusive. They can't sell room only. So, they're kind of stuck at that end of the scale where they're always going to sell with breakfast, and that's taken out of your room cost.
Yeah.
I
have a big apology to make. I have to end. I know we've only got 5 minutes left, but I actually have to end right now because I've got somebody screaming at me somewhere else.
Okay.
One last question, but maybe I'll follow up with you, B, afterwards if that's okay. But I really do have to dash off. But I thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, really great forum, and thank you for inviting me along. Thank you for working with us in STR, and anytime I can come back, I'd be delighted to.
Oh, well, don't say that. We'll have you next week. See you next week.
All right.
Okay. Thank you so much, Robin. Thank you, and we'll
Cheers.
see you soon.
Bye.
Bye. So just as Robin disappears, I just wanted to pick up on Julie's point, because the information and the knowledge sharing at the beginning about what hotels can do now, that actually feeds into that, because when you think about those stay controls, switching on your room only, everybody knows that it is the most profitable. You're not going to sell all your inventory as room only. However, if you've got your packages, your F&B and your promos all set for 3-night length of stays, 2-night length of stays, especially over the weekend, why would you not then put up your room only for the 1-night stays, but put a big exception on it and sell that, because that's going to deliver more to the bottom line. So I think actually controlling your inventory, controlling your rates, and making sure your minimum length of stays and your room only all feed in as part of that mix will improve profitability for sure. So on that note,
it depends on all those properties, really, all type of properties. Because as Rossmann was saying, there are some properties where if you don't have the other offering, then nobody's going to.
Yeah, for sure. It's about the mix, isn't it? So just moving on to our final topic, it's just the hot news, and that is about the furlough scheme in hospitality, and what's our views on the current situation, and are we seeing, have we got anything that we can, any positive spin that we can put on the furlough scheme coming to an end? What do we think is going to happen? What would we like to happen? Any views?
I would like to think that the UK government will step up, like I said at the start of this call, and actually do what Ireland is doing, give a percentage towards the overall cost of the staff to keep them going. Hospitality in the UK is actually the 3rd biggest employer. And that's the worrying part. We all had this conversation before. However, I do think they will do something, because they can't afford to allow the hospitality industry to collapse. They really and truly can't. Perfect example is the Eat Out to Help Out. That done massive. It really helped. It got people eating out. And even after, people were still eating out. I think that what happens with the governments, they're just very afraid to take control or to issue harsher restrictions, so that it looks bad on them, because they don't have a plan in place for the next section. Eat Out to Help Out was done very, very quickly. You only had a week or 2 weeks to sign up. So I think it will happen, because they can't afford to let everything fall apart. They really and truly can't in an industry that keeps us all in our jobs.
Absolutely.
No, I agree. Lots of other countries have done similar stuff, or like France is extending, and actually the helps are going to be like for a few years, they said. So I think the UK is quite new in furlough. Actually, it's the first time it ever happened. So let's hope that in the next few days they're going to come up with another plan, because we cannot let this industry like that. We know that hoteliers and operators are doing everything they can to sustain and to keep their employees, but at some point we need to be realistic. If this is not going to come back before like 6-8 months, there's going to be some cuts. So we need to make sure that government is supporting that. Yeah.
So just to wrap up then, it was fantastic to have Robin on, and we will absolutely have him back as soon as we're back on the 14th of October. So we'll see you then, Robin. Thank you. What can we say, girls? So that was a much anticipated episode, and it's brilliant to see everyone tune in and ask all their questions. So we'll wrap it up there. Thanks everyone for watching. We will see you back on the 14th of October. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.